Hello and welcome to Soteriology 101. Yes, 2 streams in one day. That's because I've had some meetings cancel on me, and asked Brian here just last minute, and he was gracious enough to jump on. Brian, welcome to the program. Appreciate you coming on, buddy.
Welcome. Thank you.
I was going to say the reasons a couple of my meetings canceled today was because of the COVID stuff. People are actually getting it now. Some people don't know, but COVID came through my family about a month ago. My oldest son brought it home with him, and so it went from one of us to the next of it, and so all of us ended up getting it, of course. And it was just like a flu. I mean, we felt bad for about a week or so, and fine afterwards. So everybody's fine, everybody's okay. But I did want to show this. Somebody sent me this. Brian, you'll get a kick out of this. Let me add it to the screen.
Maybe I should put my mask on if I'm going to be in this meeting here.
There you go. There you go. Right there. There you go. Right there. There's your mask.
So, there you go. I like it. I like
it. Like somebody sent me that. I was like, I cannot believe it was actually a college friend for school. She said she saw it on the thing, but she has the Leighton Flowers as my homie. I guess because I made some comment about how Calvinists are so good about making materials for, John Calvin is my homie and all that kind of stuff. And they've got one for Jonathan Pritchett here too. So fun stuff. Anyway, yeah, that's right. Well, what we want to talk about today is the accusation of misrepresentation. I've covered this on other broadcasts, as many of you know that have watched this. But it doesn't mean it stops. We get this kind of accusation pretty regularly, and it's usually from people who don't, in my estimation, don't understand or haven't heard very much of what I've said about Calvinism or how I've represented it. Because you tell me, Brian, you're not a yes man by any means. You're one of those people who even live broadcasts will say, I don't agree with that interpretation. I mean, so you're pretty secure in your own beliefs and your own ways. You tell me, and I didn't ask you this beforehand. I don't know what you're going to say. Honestly, I'm honestly a little bit scared that you might call me out on something here. I really don't know. Do you feel like I put enough effort in trying to honestly represent Calvinism and to at least make the caveat to say not all Calvinists agree necessarily with what I'm about to read here? Do I make a caveat to say that Calvinism is not a monolithic group? There are different forms of Calvinism. Do you feel like in your experience listening to me over the years that I have strived at least to be representative of Calvinism mainstream as a whole and to be fair to them?
Yeah, Leighton, I've been meaning to talk to you about this.
Dang it. I was really hoping to make a point here.
No, I mean, good gracious. That's why I feel so comfortable being a part of your ministry. I've been asked to be on other podcasts, and I pray about these things, and I just don't want to be a part of enabling someone who's not going to be fair-minded, who's not going to try to discern the Lord's will in giving a fair shot at the other viewpoint, and yet saying this is what the Word of God says, and I'm standing by God's word, but they're my brothers, and I want the best for them, and that's all I've ever heard from you. But I mean, just to be upfront about other things, I've talked to you behind the scenes of things that I say maybe you should try this, or maybe you should go this other direction with this other person. Because I share what I think is the best methodology, but yeah, you have done what I think is appropriate in bending over backwards to try to, appeal to your Calvinistic brothers in a very fair-minded way.
Yeah, and I have broadcasts that are out there. They're still recorded. They can be seen. Any live broadcast that I do with a classroom of people, I almost always open by saying something to the effect of, it's only fair to learn Calvinism from Calvinists, and I'm not one anymore, and so you should learn Calvinism from Calvinists. But then I go on to say, it's also only fair to learn, traditional Southern Baptist soteriology from a traditional Southern Baptist, from a non-Calvinist. And most people today are learning what Arminianism is, at least, or non-Calvinism is, from the Calvinists. And the mainstream Calvinists that are out there, like Matt Chandler, Piper, what I've heard from Deaver and Carson. I mean, what I've heard from all of the leading guys in every single presentation I've found so far, and I'm talking about the big name guys. I'm not talking about our buddies that are, small names like myself. Okay. I'm talking about the big name guys, the guys with all the books and all the recognition, John Piper type guys. Okay. I've not found a broadcast yet where they have even come close to representing Arminians or non-Calvinists in a fair way that any Arminian scholar would say, yeah, that's a really good representation of our perspective. And I appreciate that. Again, that's just been my experience, at least. It could be wrong.
Just to put the rubber on the road, I mean, if you're going to be fair, you need to quote them. And that's what you've done. You always... Right. Not always, but many times in your presentations, most of your presentations, when you're critiquing, you are giving them the voice. You're saying this is what they've said. You play back their video, and I think what we're going to be looking at together today, I looked at earlier. That's not what's happening on the other side. They're very, very little. I mean, I think James White does a lot of quoting of
I mean, sometimes you can grab a segment out of somebody's broadcast and just play 30 seconds or whatever, and then misrepresent what they meant by that. White's done that to me a couple of times, but then there's been other times when he's played me more in my context and has actually represented me fairly well. And so he would be.
But there's some guys who don't even play anything. They just say this is what he said. Or they put it in their own words, and it's not. And that's where I think a lot of the accusations come from on my Twitter account or on Facebook, where people would just say, "Oh, that Flowers guy, he doesn't understand anything about Calvinism," and I know this because something I heard James White say, or something I heard another person on the internet say about Leighton. Versus going to the source and actually listening to me for yourself and seeing. Exactly.
I try to go out of my way to represent Calvinism and understand, like the article that I've written on the subject. It's titled "You Don't Understand Calvinism." It's not a monolithic group. In fact, let me just bring that into the screen real quick. That article, because right there at the top of it. It kind of makes a statement here. It is impossible to rightly represent a view with which you disagree to the satisfaction of every opponent of that view. In other words, if I represent John Piper's form of Calvinism perfectly, there are going to be a good percentage of Calvinists who don't like John Piper's form of Calvinism. And therefore, they're going to say, you're misrepresenting Calvinism. And what they mean is you're misrepresenting my form of Calvinism. You're misrepresenting what I think Calvinism really stands for, because you're allowing John Piper to be the representative. And that's why on most of my broadcast, I'm really quick to say, not everybody agrees with John Piper on this point, or not everyone agrees with MacArthur. I can't tell you how many times I've gone through and showed where A.W. Pink it actually says something that John MacArthur contends with, where I've read from, from the Grace to You Ministries, from Phil Johnson, who talks about how there are actually 6 different interpretations among Calvinists on the views of atonement, on the major passages on atonement. 6 different takes. So it's like I only knew of 3 of them. I had to learn what some of the other ones were. I was like, good night. I didn't realize there was actually 6 different interpretations.
There's 6 different interpretations of what is a Calvinist.
I would imagine.
There are people today who will say, if you quote from John Calvin to try to prove Calvinism, you are not being fair to Calvinists.
Sure.
Because John Calvin is not a Calvinist.
Right.
I mean, they don't say those words, but that's basically what they mean. And then there's those who hold to the Westminster Confession of Faith. There are those who hold to the London Baptist Confession of Faith. I mean, it's amazing. You have to ask each one.
Yeah. Every Calvinist is a little different, and sometimes they'll believe the same basic tenets, like we had with Robert Wiesner here the other day, where he basically said, well, he doesn't believe in pre-faith regeneration. But then I press him, and he just doesn't call it regeneration. He calls it effectual calling. And so, but the principle is exactly the same. So it's a semantic difference. It's not really a substantive difference. And so I even write here that now this statement does not mean we mean to suggest we shouldn't try at least to rightly represent those with whom we disagree. We should never intentionally misrepresent or strawman the views of our brethren. And this is why I almost always play a clip of notable Calvinists or read direct quotes when bringing a critique against the claims of Calvinists. In fact, as I just said, I begin all my teaching sessions by saying it's only right to learn Calvinism from an actual Calvinist. Behold the Serpent, thank you for your donation. Says Leighton, I wish I had questions for you about Calvinism, but you articulate very well and do a wonderful job of explaining it. So praise the Lord. Thank you, Behold the Serpent. I appreciate that. Very, very kind of you. And so what I wanted to do, and I go through and I actually give 6 different reasons for the accusation of misrepresentation. One of them is just saying that some people aren't really educated on the actual claims of their own scholars. And then I read verbatim what the leading Calvinistic scholars and their confessions say. And I've had this happen where Calvinists say, oh, well, or their self-proclaimed Calvinists will come out and say, oh, I didn't realize that he said that, or I didn't realize he believed that. I don't agree with him on that. And then I would go, oh, okay, great. Neither do I. So we have something in common. It's fine if you don't agree with it. Just don't accuse me of misrepresenting the swath of what Calvinism entails, just simply because I'm not representing your particular brand of it. I think that's only fair. But what instigated this particular broadcast, besides the cancellation of meetings due to COVID stuff, which, by the way, somebody was saying, hey, don't downplay the symptoms. I wasn't meaning to downplay anything. I was just telling you that that's what happened with us. It obviously can have worse effects on other people who are have underlying health conditions. I'm just telling you what happened to us. So,
or 65 or up like me, you know.
Yeah, you're in a lot more danger than young guy like me, young spry guy like me.
I'm ready to go though, so pass it on.
Ready to go. Okay, so I just don't want to get political into that mess, whatever all this. Okay, and all that stuff. Okay, but the reason I wanted to, the reason I wanted to do this is because, well, let me give you a background of this. I've received a little notices for the last year or two. I can't remember how long it's been, from a guy from it's called the Berean Voice, and it's a older gentleman. I mean, I think he's probably in his upper 60s, 70s. I'm guessing. He said he's been a Calvinist for over 50 years, so I'm assuming that's around that. I'm guessing. He seems in some of his videos to be kind of a kindly gentleman that's bringing critique, and then other ones he seems a little upset. So to put it mildly, doesn't like me too much. Obviously, disagrees with me.
You've got too strong of an influence in the Southern Baptists. I think that's what ticked him off on this one. Maybe
so, but then I get this notice. Somebody sends me this notice and says, "Hey, you won somebody over. Like you convinced this guy," and sends me a link. And it's him. It's this guy that I'd seen before. I think is Randy Siver, I believe is his name. And it said, "Why I have decided to reject Calvinism." And I thought maybe he's come around. You know, I see it happen. It actually happened with Brad Zaub and 4 or 5 other people who were critiquing. Matter of fact, I got a call for the other day. A guy, what's his name, Matt? I cannot remember his last name. But anyway, he had actually been blocked on my Twitter because of how mean he was being to me. And he had called me and told me he'd left Calvinism and he would apologize to me and everything else. And he's going to come on the show at some point. We're working out details on that. But so it happens. So I really thought maybe this Randy Siver had converted. Maybe he had considered the error of his ways. But then I listened to the video, and it's about a 15-minute video of sarcasm, and then kind of the end of it saying, beware of Leighton Flowers, the heretic, kind of a thing to the end. And you guys know, I don't like to promote videos that, that do that to each other, where we're shouting each other down as heretics or being overly contentious with each other, because I don't want to promote that kind of behavior. I really don't. But I really do feel for Randy. I mean, to be honest, I mean, if I had remained in my Calvinism all the way up into my 70s, and I was just firmly convinced of it, and maybe I was even more of a moderate kind of a Calvinist, like maybe an Almeraldian type of Calvinist, which he may
I
be.
think he is, yeah.
Yeah, he could be. I could see how, if you just saw some snippets of my videos along the way, and you hear me really coming down on the harder line, true 5-point Calvinist out there, the true Calvinism, qual Calvinism, the theistic deterministic system that it is. If you saw me coming against that really hard, you might start feeling like he is making us all sound like determinists, and that makes me angry. I could see that. I could feel that pain. I mean, I understand where he's coming from there. And I think that's what's prompted this video, is that he's angry because he feels like someone like myself, who has somewhat of a voice, I guess, with regard to the Southern Baptist Convention and the belief in soteriology, and he sees me representing Calvinism in a way that he doesn't want Calvinism represented. And that's why he makes this sarcastic video. So what we're going to do is I'm going to play the video. I don't know if I'll stop it or not along the way. Maybe we should probably stop it as we go. And I'll make comments if I need to, or Brian, you can wave me down if you want to make a comment, feel free. But you can hear the sarcasm in his voice, but you can also understand, as I started listening to this, I was really getting excited, thinking, all right, man, Randy, way to go, man. Way to be objective enough to leave behind a system of 50 years, which, by the way, I've had people say they've been a Calvinist for 30, 40, 50 years who've left it even recently. So that is possible. People can change their mind on stuff. So, all right, let's listen in. Let's see what he says. Oh, by the way, Brian, let me know if sound-wise this is working. Loud enough for people to hear. I should have tested it beforehand.
Hello and welcome to the Berean Voice. I'm Randy
Good.
Siver. Today,
you might want to go up higher.
I can't go up higher. That's part of the problem.
Okay, no, I can turn up my own sound.
Well,
system.
it's not just that. It's just it's frustrating because people record at lower levels than I'm recording at, and they don't give you on this one a way of
turning it up,
any louder than what the thing is.
Okay.
But I'll just start it here, and everybody turn up your volume while we're playing it, because I don't know how else to deal with it. If anybody else knows how, well, I do know you have to strip it. You have to pull it out, and then you have to reprogram with a louder volume. And for those, by the way, who are doing videos online, this is something you should maybe learn as far as the videos.
Exactly.
Is learn to record at a higher volume level, because it's hard for people to hear low recording levels. So, okay, here. Wait, somebody's saying ears audio toolkit augments sound. Oh, well, contact me later and teach me how to do that, because I don't know how to make the volume any louder than what the thing gives me here. So here goes.
Very apologetically, and I'd like to talk to you about the subject, why I have decided to reject Calvinism. And the reason is I've been spending time watching Dr. Leighton Flowers on his broadcast Soteriology 101, and I've come to understand some things that for the last 50 years I have just been completely and absolutely wrong about. I was reared in a Southern Baptist church, and during my formative years, I was about 16 years of age when my father left the Southern Baptist Convention and became an unaffiliated Baptist pastor. He never liked the idea of independent fundamentalist Baptist, but he was unaffiliated, and I had these heroes in the fundamentalist movement, and I went away to a fundamentalist school.
I want to straighten his picture behind him.
And during my freshman year, I was introduced to Calvinism. I was introduced to the doctrines of grace, and I was initially very put off by it, and I was angry about the whole idea. And I began to study, and over
You get kicked out of Bob Jones if you were
years, I came
hyper-Calvinist.
to an understanding, I
Yeah.
thought, of what Calvinists believe, and I embraced the doctrine, and that's been many, many years ago. We're talking about over 50 years now, and I have tried to be faithful to what I believe Calvinists taught, and I've tried to be faithful to what I believe the Bible taught, but I've been listening to Dr. Flowers, and shoot, every time I listen to him, I get more and more enlightened about what Calvinists believe, and from what he's telling me, Calvinists don't believe anything like what I've always been taught or what I've read, and I've read extensively in Reformed theology, and I graduated. My terminal degree is from Westminster Theological Seminary, where I received a THM degree, and man, I read Ritterboss and Voss, and I read all those guys, and I've read carefully the canons of Dort and the Westminster Confession of Faith, and I really believe that's what Calvinists believed. I don't know how I could have been so stupid to have read those confessions of faith and believe that these men actually wrote down what they believed in the confessions. I mean, they must have just been a bunch of charlatans who were trying to deceive all of us by writing the things they did. And as I'm listening to Dr. Flowers,
That's an ad hominem.
Yeah, a little bit.
And he's indirectly accusing you of calling them charlatans.
Yeah, and he's obviously being sarcastic. He's trying to make a point through sarcasm, where he's pretending like he's converted away from Calvinism because he's converted away from my representation, saying that my representation doesn't even represent Calvinism at all.
Indirectly, he's saying that, but he sarcastically he's saying, "Oh, you must be so smart, you must know," and so I've been convinced.
Yeah. Well, and the reason I want to play this is because he gets into more details here, because he starts to give details of ways in which he believes I've misrepresented him, and those are the ones I want to answer, because I want to be fair to this gentleman, because I think though the methodology he's using to approach this is probably not the most Christ-like methodology. I think he probably should just come out and say, Leighton, you said this, and this is what we believe. That would probably be a little more productive. But nevertheless, I can understand in anger, when you're upset about something, we do all kinds of things sometimes when we're angry about something, and I get it. So let's hear him out.
Man, am I ever confused, because he has a PhD. He's got a
Dr. Wagner
stop it right there.
Dr. Wagner has a PhD. I have a doctorate of ministry degree, just so it is. So it's actually, you're the evil one. You're the evil PhD.
I'm the evil one, right? And there's a lot of us out there. So
okay, here we go.
1 degree higher than the one I have, and you just got thousands of followers, and can so many people be wrong? And can he be wrong if all these people are believing what he's saying? And he's just having a powerful impact. So, I've just come to the conclusion that there wasn't a single Calvinist in the last 500 years who understood, or 400 and whatever years, who really understood what they believed. They must have really thought they believed something different from what they believed, because they wrote all this stuff down in their confessions, and according to what Dr. Flowers is saying, they didn't really believe any of this stuff. For example, he tells us
that's a very strong misrepresentation without any evidence. No. And when he finally gets to the evidence, he's not really quoting you either. This is, I would say, this is a great example for guys, young guys, not just old guys that want to be significant on YouTube or Facebook, but young guys who want to be significant in ministry. Prayerfully pray presentations and how you come across, and you want to make sure your evidence is strong. You want to make sure you're presenting scripture. The story comes to my mind when the disciples of Jesus, said, "Hey, those guys over there are casting out demons in your name, and they're not following us."
Yeah.
Jesus said, "Let them alone." He said they can't be doing that much harm,
Yeah.
And so I think guys like this should even contact. He should have contacted you first.
And maybe he tried to, because I mean, there's a lot of people who send
we're only an
messages.
email away. Well, yeah, you are hard to get a hold of. That is true.
Yeah. Well, and I get so many messages, especially from people who critique my views. So he may, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's say he tried to reach out to me and that I didn't see it. But yeah, nevertheless, let's let him continue to represent
what Calvinists
here.
believe when they talk about the sovereignty of God is that God meticulously causes all of the sin that happens in the world.
Okay, so do any Calvinists believe that God meticulously causes all the sins in the world? Yes. Bing Young, who we had on, Chris Date, who we've had on, John Piper believes that all things, including all sins of all time, of all creation, were meticulously brought to pass by God's sovereign decree. That is a representation of Calvinism. It's not his particular brand of Calvinism, obviously, I guess, but
he wants to keep decree and cause separate, and that's the biggest problem. Okay, God decreed it, but he didn't cause it. He decreed secondary causes, and so he really didn't do the secondary cause. The secondary cause guy did the secondary cause, but he decreed that secondary cause.
Yeah.
And so it's the decree makes everything necessary before it ever takes place.
Yeah, and this is where we oftentimes, like in the article, where I'll just put all these quotes of Calvin, and there's John Calvin. Of course, he may not agree with John Calvin on this,
right?
But he still calls himself a Calvinist,
right?
But it's not a true Calvinist, qual Calvinist. It's not true Calvinism, where he says, "How foolish and frail is the support of divine justice, afforded by the suggestion that evils come to be not by his will but by his permission. It's quite frivolous refuge to say that God obtusely permits them when Scripture shows him not only willing but the author of him." In other words, he calls them the author of evil. Now, are there other confessions later that say he's not the author of evil? Yeah, there are. There are some who try to say he's not the author of evil, but that he does decree all evil, and that decree is not causal in that way. And there's a different kind of causation. They'll talk about secondary causations. By the way, I've got broadcasts on all of those things. I mean, we talked about those things pretty regularly.
Right.
Somebody there on the side chat, one of the Facebook users, you haven't registered, so I can't see your name, but he said, first, the eternal predestination of God, by which before the fall of Adam, he decreed what should take place concerning the whole human race, and every individual was fixed and determined, end quote, by John Calvin. Again, so I'm not trying to misrepresent John Calvin. I really want people to understand what John Calvin taught and what he believes. Another quote from the Facebook user there, what we maintain is that when men act perversively, they do so according to the testimony of Scripture by ordaining purpose of God. So when somebody acts in a perverse way, they do so by the ordained purpose of God, by what God decreed for them to do. Even the leading compatibilistic scholars like Bing Yang is being promoted by some of the most predominant Calvinists out there that I've seen. And he wrote a very, very clear book on what he refers to as causal determination. He even has in that video where we're talking back and forth. No, some people don't understand. We do affirm meticulous divine causation of all things that happen. He's very, very clear about that. I've had him on the program. If you don't agree with that, fine, great, welcome. we agree with you. We can stand together in disagreeing with those kinds of Calvinists. If you want to call them higher Calvinists than you are, wonderful, great, that's wonderful. But I'm mostly standing up against Calvinism, qua Calvinism, the true form of theistic determinism that is represented by one of the most notable Calvinists, at least today, and most influential Calvinists today, John Piper. And so I understand there are other softer views of Calvinism, but I can't be responsible. And it's not my duty to represent every form of Calvinist, every single broadcast that I do. Calvinists don't do that for us. So, I mean, Calvinists rarely represent our form of non-Calvinism. They usually represent a God looking through the quarters of time, foresight, faith, Wesleyan, Arminian view of something sort. So why should I be obligated to try to represent every form of Calvinism every time I talk? It's just not a reasonable thing. All right, here he goes on.
He'll quote John Piper. I mean, if he can quote John Piper, and if he can quote R.C. Sproul about these things, then he must be right. And he'll quote Piper, and he's convinced, and he's convincing me that man, Piper believes that when a child is molested, and look, I think Dr. Flowers is right in using that emotionally charged example, because you couldn't talk about something that's less emotionally charged and get.
So who taught about that example? Leighton Flowers, or was it?
You were repeating Piper,
John Piper. Well, and here it is right there. I mean, this is God brings about all things and according with His will. It isn't just that God manages to turn evil aspects of our world for good, those who love Him. It's rather that He Himself brings about these evil aspects for His glory and His people's good. This includes, as incredible and unacceptable as it may currently seem, the sexual abuse of a young child, among other things. But He's the one who brought up the sexual abuse of a young child. That's His book from Mark Talbert. He's the editor of the book. It's still up at Desiring God Ministries. The last I looked, about probably a month ago. It's not trying to hide it. Yes, it's emotional. I agree. But the reason you point out those emotional things is to demonstrate that when you're talking about evil and heinous evil, and you're saying God brought it to pass for His glory, again, I'm representing Him. He's the one saying that. You may, Randy, you may want to say, John Piper, stop saying that stuff because that doesn't represent what we believe. I would welcome that. I would say, yes, please, thank you. I would love for more softer forms of Calvinism to become more in the mainstream than John Piper is. I'd love to see that. I'd give you a voice for something like that. But don't accuse me of misrepresenting him when I'm reading his very words. I mean, what else am I supposed to do, brother? All right, here we go. Oh, wait, let me put him back in.
About the most gruesome thing you can possibly think of, and then talk about God ordaining that and God causing that. And He'll convince you if you listen to Him without thinking.
Now, is he talking about me or Piper? When he says he'll convince you if you're listening to him that God brings about molestation of children for His glory. Is he talking about me or is he talking about John Piper?
And is it ordained or not?
Yeah.
I mean, he wants to separate cause and ordain, but in that sentence, he put them together.
All right. Well, William on the side chat says, I think you're being unfair. Randy, get Randy on so he can answer your questions directly. I don't mind talking to Randy. He does call me a heretic at the end of this, so I'm not sure he wants to talk to a heretic that's going to hell. But he and I'm not sure I want to put someone like that on the program because I'm not sure where he's going to go with that. But what am I being? Can you give me a specific? Can you give me a specific about what I've said that's unfair? I've simply played what he's saying live, and I'm responding to it by showing you the quotes of where I'm getting it from. I don't think I'm being unfair. Brian would call me out if I'm being unfair, wouldn't you, Brian?
Yes, I would call you out. And I've already mentioned to you what I think about this situation. That we should use it as an example, not be too tough on him because I don't think he prepared himself well, and but we should use it as an example of how we should do our ministries, and be very careful in how we make sure we give both sides. And you're giving his side. You're saying this is what he's saying.
Well, I'm just playing what's there on the broadcast.
And he didn't do that for you. He didn't play what you said. He's putting in.
Well, he may on other videos. I don't know. I haven't seen all of his stuff.
Well,
maybe he does that on other videos.
He should have.
He does it here.
He should have in this one. This is, he should have put up on the screen. This is a quote, just like you put up a quote from Piper and from Calvin. He should have put up a quote This is what Leighton Flowers said.
Yeah.
But,
and usually when I do that, when somebody accuses me of misrepresentation, I say, okay, give me a specific quote,
right.
and why you think it's misrepresentative of all forms of Calvinism. And usually it goes silent after that. The second response is, though, occasionally I'll have a quote that's provided, and then I will show them where a leading Calvinist has said verbatim sometimes what I was critiquing. And then they will reply, well, that guy doesn't represent me. And then I will say, good, he doesn't represent me either. I mean, we disagree. We both disagree with him then. So I'm not misrepresenting the guy I'm critiquing. I'm misrepresenting what you think Calvinism should be represented as. And I understand that. And I've given that caveat countless times throughout my program. So I don't know what else to do. Here we go.
He'll convince you that, yeah, God caused, he put the thought into the person's mind. He put the desire into the person's mind to molest a child, and he caused that child.
Again, Piper didn't say he put the thought into the, he says he brings it about by sovereign decree.
He decreed the thought.
He decreed the thought. Right. So if he's bringing about an evil thought like molestation, if God's bringing that about, what does that mean? Does it originate in the mind of the creator or creature? I think it originates in the mind of the creature, not the creator. Piper seems to believe and teach that it originates in the mind of God by sovereign decree. And I disagree with that.
People exist before creation, making choices. God had to make up the whole human history in determinism, including man's thoughts, including man's choices.
Right.
Child molestation. That's what Calvinists believe. You know, they must have been out of their gourd when they wrote that when God decreed all that he decreed, that does not make him the author of evil. They must have been really.
I can't tell you how many times I've quoted the Westminster that says that God's not the author of evil, and I've even done it in light of what Calvin said, where he does refer to God as being the author of evil, and how there's a distinction between oftentimes the confessional writers who are trying to soften sometimes their scholars and some of the scholars' claims. I've read that matter of fact, I had Pritchett on when we walked through the Westminster Confession, talking through those things. We believe it's not sufficient. We believe that that the Westminster is contradictory with itself, and we make an argument for why we believe that. And that's just an argument. I mean, but we've shown that before. We've represented that before. So to pretend like I haven't represented the Westminster Confession's claim that they're not the author. Matter of fact, I've talked about Calvinists quite regularly not saying that God's not the author of evil. And then I ask the question, what is the difference between God authoring evil and God sovereignly and unchangeably decreeing it before the foundation of the world? Because you have some people who say God sovereignly and unchangeably decreed sin, but he's not the author of sin. And I'm trying to say, okay, what's the difference between authoring it and sovereignly and unchangeably decreeing it? Because you don't believe that he foreknows it and permits it. Your confession says he doesn't do it that way. So explain it for me. Help me understand. If it's not a causal decree, then is it a permissive decree? And if it's a permissive decree, then why does your confession say it's not by permission? Maybe I'm just not bright enough to get that. And that's very, very possible. But the fact that William Lane Craig also says he doesn't get it too makes me feel a little bit better, because I know he's a mountain of a intellect. But nevertheless, he goes.
Well, that's the issue. It's the definition of terms, and when you really push them on it. So what is the difference between decree and cause? What is the difference between decree and predestination? What is the difference between decree and predetermined? They don't like going in that direction. What's the difference between authoring? Where did all the story come from that ended up in God's mind before the foundation of the world? Somebody had to author it.
Yeah. Yeah.
and
the origin somewhere.
Or God is a robot. God's tied to a story that he couldn't change, because he doesn't have free will either. And when you push some of them, they'll eventually admit that they don't believe God has free will.
Yeah. It can get pretty hairy philosophically for sure.
Yeah.
All right, here we go.
confused when they wrote that he doesn't have fellowship with any in sin. They must have been really confused when they wrote that God does not violate free will. They must.
Well, I'd like to read that section where they say that God doesn't violate free will, and compare it to what the other leading Calvinistic compatibilistic scholars are saying, because that would depend on what you mean by free will. If you mean by libertarian free will, or you mean compatibilistic free will, which we've had dozens of programs explaining the distinctions between the philosophical perspectives and trying to represent them fairly, and even had guests on that hold different views to try to represent those. Again, I'm trying to represent them.
Yeah, he gives his view, if you listen carefully a little bit further on here, of what he means by free will. And it's definitely not libertarian free will, but it's the will of your nature doing freely what it is bent towards doing.
Right.
Have been really confused when they said God uses second causes, sometimes causes which are contrary to his declared will to accomplish his.
And notice how he switched there.
Must have really been.
He had to switch from decree to declared will.
Exactly. He didn't want to say decree because that would be wrong.
Right.
Declared will to accomplish his causes which are contrary to his declared will to accomplish his purpose.
So because the declared will, the prescriptive will, the will that comes out of his mouth, is distinct on Calvinism from the decreed will. The decreed will is the causal one, because everything that actually happens, that actually comes to pass, that's in accordance with his decreed will.
Right.
His spoken will or his declared will doesn't always come to pass. So he says, I don't want you to lie, but you lie. The reason you lied is because he decreed for you to lie, but that's against his spoken and declared will. So you kind of see that he's even struggling with making sure he gets the wording right, because it can get a little bit confounding sometimes.
They must have really been confused when they wrote those things, because what Dr. Flowers is saying that Calvinists believe and what these Calvinists say Calvinists believe are two completely different things. In fact, in my whole 15
And so right here, if he stopped and he played a video of me saying something completely contrary to what these scholars said, and never representing the Westminster Confession or any of these scholars, then he would be making a good case. But he has no foundation for this. He has no basis for this. And I actually have foundation and basis to prove exactly the opposite of what he's claiming here. And so that's the kind of thing that doesn't hold water to bring an accusation without proof.
Years of being a Calvinist, I don't think there was ever a time that I ever met a Calvinist. Now, there were some hyper-Calvinists along the way, but obviously they didn't believe what Calvinists have confessed to believe, or they wouldn't be hyper-Calvinist. But I never met a single Calvinist who ever understood with the keen insight that Dr. Flowers has about what Calvinists believe, contrary to what he's been told
another ad hominem
times about what Calvinists believe.
What are you talking about? You said I had keen insight. I believe him when he says that one.
Sarcasm. Sarcasm makes it an ad hominem.
Oh, that's not sarcasm. That's just truth. All right. He goes on here.
But the keen insight that he has about what Calvinists really believe. We don't believe what we say we believe. What we really believe is that
what I actually quote you saying.
Yeah, exactly.
What I actually quote Piper saying. Does he really believe what it? Well, yeah, he does, but you may not. You may disagree with Piper, which is great. It'd be fine.
God, let me just stop here because it comes to my mind. And I'm going to say this directly to Randy. If you're watching this, and I hope you do, you probably will. I would recommend, brother, that you take one of Leighton's brief videos, like we're taking yours right now. He's got a number of them on various scriptures that the Calvinists hold to, use as their proof text, and go ahead and critique it, part by part.
He may have done that. Somebody who's on the side chat is saying that he has several videos critiquing my videos.
Okay, well, I'll have to look.
He may have done that. Yeah, I haven't watched them, so I don't know how well he's represented them. So, but based upon what I'm seeing here, I'm not sure how well he's representing me and those other ones, but
based on this one, this is a bad introduction if that is the case.
Yeah, and again, I sometimes people play my video, in the middle of it or something like that, and it's not the best representation of what I'm trying to say. I get it, and I put a link. You can go watch his other videos. I encourage you to go watch it. Be good Bereans, as he's called the Berean Voice. So be good Bereans and go listen to what else he has to say. It's fine with me. I'm not. If y'all ever notice, I'm not real scared of people disagreeing with me. I usually welcome them on, talk through with them. The qualification I typically try to have for those I bring onto the show, though, is that they don't call me a heretic and unbeliever. And I don't know that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, those experiences.
I'm not sure if Randy Siver will fit that criteria, unfortunately.
Puppeteer. God meticulously causes everything that comes to pass so that God is indeed the author of sin. And he does have fellowship. God is the one who puts that pride into our hearts. God is the one who causes us to do evil things because we believe God is just a malevolent being who doesn't care anything.
Okay, so have I ever said that Calvinists believe that God is a malevolent being? Or have I said Calvinists believe, like I said in my last episode, by the way, Calvinists believe God sinlessly brings this thing to pass through secondary causes, and that by divine decree, he is bringing things to pass that are sinful, like the pride, like the lust, like all those things. He brings them to pass, but somehow, mysteriously, he does it sinlessly. I even read a quote from John Calvin talking about how he's meditated on these things for years, and he confesses ignorance as to how God is not the author. He even says, I don't know how God is not the author, given what I believe, but we believe that he's not. I read that in my last episode even. So, and I've read it dozens of times before, in fact. So again, you're bringing an accusation without foundation. You're not giving an example, and I'm actually showing you examples of where I've done just the opposite of what you're accusing me of, Randy.
About holiness or righteousness, but all he cares about is the manifestation of his own glory. And that has nothing to do with the manifestation of his holiness. So, again, Dr. Flowers must be right because, he's got a PhD and he's got all those followers. And, he used to be a Calvinist, he says, if you can believe that. And so I'm sure he's right.
For a second, this is one of the bigger issues that Calvinists have to deal with. And that is it possible for someone to actually be a Calvinist?
Be a non-Calvinist, you mean?
And then become a non-Calvinist.
Oh, right.
I've seen it. It's in every
once Calvinized, always Calvinized kind of a thing.
It's even like in Roman Catholicism. I've seen it in a hyper Roman Catholicism. If you've left Roman Catholicism, you never really understood Roman Catholicism. And so it's that idea, can you really understand the position of somebody else and leave it? Mm-hmm. And say, I see it as being unbiblical or illogical.
Or can you even remain like you outside of the camp? And can you still understand it?
Yeah, and still understand, but that's even more. That's even easier to understand. That you never were there, but someone who's actually been there and professed it and taught it, and then left. I think it's just the people who remain. They I've seen it in Roman Catholicism when I ministered in Ireland. The people who remain, they feel an insecurity that you exist, this you ex-Catholic, you exist. And so they basically say, well, you never really understood Roman Catholicism.
Right. Yeah, and it's a defense mechanism. You don't want, and I feel it. I mean, if somebody says that they were surely a provisionist and they believed exactly like I did, and they said, hey, I read Leighton's books and I was all on board, and now I'm a 5-point Calvinist, I would really question whether they understood provisionism. I would really wonder whether they really got what I would.
So you're saying your doctrine is irresistible? Is that what
Yeah, right, right. No, I'm just saying it's natural to wonder whether somebody really understood a system if they're going to object to it, especially if you think your system is right. You know, it's natural. It's natural to believe that.
It is
I see that. All right, here we go.
Thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Calvinists who have lived since 16, 18, and 19. All of them. Just were really confused about what they believe, because they stated things that Dr. Flowers is now telling us just aren't true.
I need examples in order to be able to know how to respond.
He's going to give an example. He's going to start talking about limited atonement, and he gives the impression that he doesn't believe in limited atonement. So he's going to turn his back on thousands and thousands of Calvinists who believe in limited atonement.
Yeah. Well, let's hear what he says.
And you know, in addition to that, I've seen Dr. Flowers talk about the fact that Calvinists don't believe that there's any provision made for any sinner, and that if sinners, according to the Calvinists, if a sinner goes to hell, it's because God didn't make any provision for him.
Okay, so now he seems to be the James White's type of Calvinism, the guys that do reject the extent of the atonement being universal.
Only in value, though. You have to listen carefully, because he will not say. And I'll stop you when it gets to the place where he talks about faith, because
this is the whole point that David Allen's making in his book on atonement, is talking about the Reformed history, all the quotes of the universal extent of the atonement. The Princeton theologians, Hodge and Dabney and Shedd, all those guys talked about a universal extent of the atonement. And then men like Owen came along, who contended with those guys, saying that, well, the extent is limited to only the elect, and there's a hypothetical provision. There's in other words, if God intended for it to apply to them, it would, but he didn't intend it to, so the extent is limited only to.
I would say they all have, I might be wrong, but I would say that the normal Reformed view of all of them was that the value is more than sufficient for the whole world. And the offer is made to the whole world. But the intent, and that's the word, the intent was only for the elect, and therefore the extent only goes to the elect.
Yeah, so, according to Allen, there is in Reformed history, like with Davenant and prior to Owen model being popularized.
Well, Owen's pretty old.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty old view too. But prior to that, the Reformed tradition held to a universal extent of the atonement. But the intention of the atonement was limited only for the elect. And that's
always been the case. Intent was only for the elect.
Right. Yes. And then that's where there was a difference between what we would call the intent, extent, and application, the three kind of parts of the atonement.
Yeah,
anyway,
right.
We get into the weeds of that, but nevertheless, here we go.
And I want to talk in our next video about what's wrong with limited atonement, and we'll get into that a little bit. You read people like A.A. Hodge, for an example.
There's our Princeton theologian.
Look up what he wrote. It's in his Outlines of Theology, and it's under.
I actually quoted Hodge in response to White, so go back and listen. I mean, it's on record still. I actually quoted from the Princeton theologians to combat the Owen perspective that James White promotes, and David Allen. And I've had David Allen on the show 3 times. Going through all of these things, actually agreeing with what you're saying. It sounds like to me, Randy, that the extent of the atonement, even among reformers, has predominantly been universal. So it sounds like I do a better job representing them than James White does. So go that way.
The extent of the death of Christ, and this is what he wrote. The design of Christ's death being to secure the salvation of his own people, incidentally to the accomplishment of that end, it comprehends the offer of that salvation freely and honestly to all men on the condition of their faith.
I read that quote.
Yeah,
I got to go find it.
Notice it's the offer. The extent of the offer is to all men on the condition of their faith.
Right.
but the faith has to be a gift.
Well, yeah, that's where it all comes back.
So the gift, the extending of the gift of faith is only going to be to a few.
Yeah.
So the extending of the offer is to everybody, but not everybody can hear because they don't get the faith. And so there's already an extent. The word extent is the word we're playing with here. So the word extent of the offer is to everybody. The word extend, as far as the value, is more than enough for everybody. But the word extent, as far as the intention never extended beyond those who he was going to give faith to.
I know that quote is in Allen's book.
Yeah,
and I actually used that quote in a response to James White's perspective, more Owen perspective, true limited perspective. That's funny that he's
Owen's hard to read, but I think if you read Owen, he actually has the same idea as far as the value is more than sufficient for the sins of the world. The offer is extended to everybody, but the intent was never extended.
Right. Well, there's the hypothetical sufficiency is the Owen perspective, whereas the actual sufficiency on the Hodge views. And I would think that Randy here probably agrees with the Princeton theologians of actual sufficiency versus the hypothetical sufficiency of Owen. And so I don't know. That gets into the weeds of it. But this again is an intermingle debate between the Calvinists, which I have very clearly represented on many of my programs. So to paint it as if, I've actually read the actual quote he's reading in defense of a universal extent against James White. So, what more can I do? So I'm just saying.
Right. No man is lost for the want of an atonement, or because there is any other barrier in the way of his salvation than his most free and wicked will.
There you go. Free to be wicked. Free to be wicked.
His most free and wicked will under compatibilism is according to his nature, which he's born with, and he couldn't do otherwise because of the nature he was born with due to the fall.
And the lack of faith.
Right. And how many times have we unpacked that? Good night. It's like a broken record. We've talked about that so often. So
yeah.
All right.
This man claimed to be a Calvinist. Believe it or not, this is what he thought Calvinists believed. But Dr. Flowers tells us that Calvinists believe there is no provision made for the non-elect, and if they go to hell, it's just because Jesus didn't.
This is just blatantly false. I've represented with David Allen and others on this program since my third episode. When I talked about limited atonement on my third episode, I have represented the universal extent of most of the reformers. This is what made some Calvinists mad, even. Brother Randy, listen, this is some of the Calvinists got mad at me because I was using Calvinists to help defeat other Calvinists. I was quoting Hodge and Dabney and Davenant and all of these guys that believed in the universal extent in order to combat the higher limited atonement guys. Again, this is demonstrably false. And so you need to do, I'll say it in love, but you need to do your homework a little bit more. Don't just listen to a couple of clips here and there and then come to a conclusion about who you think I am or what you think I believe, because I have represented Calvinism more like your perspective against the higher Calvinists like Piper and James White and others.
For them, and they don't believe because God has determinatively caused them to be lost.
Okay, so I know that the lower forms of Calvinists wouldn't say determinatively caused them to be lost or determinatively caused them not to believe, but this is the logical end of your system if you believe the T of Tulip, which is the concept and idea that people by nature are born haters of God with this corrupt nature that can't do anything but hate God. Who, if not God, decided that would be the result of the fall? In other words, it's under his decree. It's even on your view, even the lowest form of Calvinism still believes T of total inability. And so I don't understand how you can say that just happened by accident. You can say, well, no, they're choosing by nature. But okay, who's in control of their nature if not God?
Right.
Either it's a fallen nature they were born with, they have no control over that, or it's a regenerate nature that they're given at some point that God decides to give it to them, and they have no control over that. That's just another form of determinism, as far as I can tell, as far as the practical ends of it. I mean, again, I'm glad to hear out other perspectives there, but it just seems to me there's nothing inaccurate with pulling out the logical end of somebody's claim if that's where it leads, if we feel like it leads there.
And
if we can't use,
go ahead. Sorry.
If we can't use logic and scripture in our evaluations, then we can't have conversation, because if you don't follow the rules of logic, then anything is true. A contradiction is true. And that's what we're trying to point out, is a contradiction can't be true.
Right. Well, yeah. And if somebody's going around saying, well, A equals not A, A equals not A. And then they just say, how dare you tell us that A equals not A when we don't believe A equals not A? Well, we're making an argument based upon your claims. Right. And so if your claims seem to suggest to us that there's a contradiction, then we're just highlighting what we believe is the contradiction. You can make another argument, a counter argument, saying here's why it's not a contradiction, and that'd be fine. That'd be perfectly acceptable. But it doesn't mean we're misrepresenting you. It certainly doesn't mean we're intentionally trying to misrepresent people or intentionally misleading people or something like that, which seems what you're implying that I'm doing.
Believe, then count me out. You know, I really thought I understood what Calvinists believe. I really thought that when they said in the second head of doctrine of the canons of Dort, this is the initial statement of Calvinism. This is what, they should have known what Calvinists believe, since they were claiming to be Calvinist, and yet they wrote, listen to what they wrote, that how confused can you be? They wrote, the death of the Son of God is the only and most perfect sacrifice and satisfaction for sin, and is of infinite worth and value, abundantly sufficient to expiate the sins of the whole world.
I've read that quote. So has David Allen. On this program, David Allen read that quote.
Yeah. So the sufficiency to expiate is available, but it's never going to be off. It's going to be, and it's even going to be
applied. No application. Right.
But it can't be applied to, but only to those who he will give faith to, and they are predetermined.
Yep. Thank you for the donation. I'm not sure how to pronounce that name, so I just put it up there on the screen. But thank you for your generous donation. I appreciate that very much.
Consciousness, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not. If you know me, I'm pretty conscientious about mispronunciating words.
There you go.
I just don't even try sometimes. Just like, I know I do it too often.
And yet, Dr. Flowers he must be right. He's got that PhD.
He keeps giving me a PhD. That's wonderful.
He didn't study Greek or anything like that, because he doesn't seem to know it. And he doesn't really.
Well, I sure do remember taking those Greek courses, dadgum. They never made us we never had to speak Greek. We only had to write it. So I never learned really how to pronounce Greek very well. But yeah, I remember the Greek courses I had to take, and that was fun. A little bit of an ad hominem there. I mean,
the whole thing is ad hominem, unfortunately, but and it really, and unfortunately, again, it points out, if you're going to use ad hominem, make sure you have your facts straight, because you don't have a PhD. So no, he hasn't done his own homework well. Yeah.
Yeah. You just, sometimes if you hear doctor, you just assume PhD instead of doctor ministry or what is the other one's? PhD, and there's several other kinds of doctors.
There's an STD. Yeah. No, I'm serious.
Oh yeah, that's right. I remember making fun of somebody with that.
Sacred theology, right?
Yeah, sacred. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Okay.
I know a lot of other stuff, but he got the PhD, and so we got to believe that he's right, and he's got all those followers. And can so many people really be wrong? And so when he tells us that Calvinists don't believe that the work of Christ is sufficient to save every sinner who will ever believe the gospel, then we have to believe what he says. And the only ones who believe there's an abundant and completely valuable a sacrifice made for sinners. The only ones that believe that are the provisionalists, his group. And so we just, we're just, if you're.
How many times have I used the lower Calvinist to combat the higher Calvinist? How many times have I quoted from the Princeton theologians to combat the James Whites of the world? I can't count how many times. It would not be hard for him to find it. And yet he makes this video without any knowledge of any of that information, it seems to me. What's ironic about this is that he and I actually agree with each other about the atonement issues, for the most part, on those aspects of it, in contrast to James White, John Owen's perspective.
Yeah, he's having a 4-pointer, right?
Yeah. And so that interesting.
You're a Calvinist. You're just really confused because, some of you people have stated these things that you believe, and I guess you really think that's what Calvinists believe, but Dr. Flowers is right. Shoot, who are we to disagree? And then, I heard him today. He's saying that Calvinists don't believe in free will. We just believe.
Actually, Jeff Durbin said that. I was playing Jeff Durbin, another leading Calvinist, somebody who's watched by thousands more people than I am, who has a guy in his audience that he quotes from who's a doctorate. So, I could say all the same kinds of things. In other words, when they deny free will, what are they denying? As I've explained before, they're denying libertarian free will, and they're promoting a compatibilistic form of free will, which again, many people have no clue about those things unless they watch our program, because we explain them for people. We help people understand the difference between libertarian free will and compatibilistic free will. And we've had many shows explaining the difference between those two perspectives and why we side with the more libertarian perspective over the compatibilistic perspective. And so we're trying to educate people on the facts. And if I happen to be playing a Calvinist who just says free will is, unbiblical, like Durbin did in that video, then that's on him. Why don't you make a video against Durbin? You and I would agree with each other on that.
Why don't you make a video against the ESV? They use the word free will throughout the Old Testament. There are different places. So
yeah. Well, and he seems to be saying that Calvinists do believe in free will, of course they do. They believe in typically compatibilistic free will, meaning God,
which isn't
God. Yeah. Which obviously is not free will in our perspective. We wouldn't call it free.
Right.
Nevertheless.
Believe people are robots, and that, God can't leave us to our own decisions. It's like, you put food in front of a child and you can force them to eat it, or you can just leave it to them to eat it or not eat it. And that's the way God does things. He doesn't force people like the Calvinists believe he forces people against their wills. Because we're just robots. We're puppets, and so that.
No, say clay pots in the hand of a potter, and if you interpret clay pots in the hand of a potter to mean that God shapes and molds people to believe in him and trust in him and obey him, and other people he shapes to be unbelievers who don't obey him, then if you're going to interpret that woodenly to mean that pots are passive, then if that is the definition of what you think that particular analogy in Scripture is meant to portray, then why object to another analogy that brings the same conclusion, like a puppet or a robot? In fact, when I was a Calvinist, what I said in that video, when I was a Calvinist, I actually didn't try to distance myself from the robot or the puppet accusation. I would say, oh, it's worse than puppets. It's worse than robots. At least puppets and robots could be made to look real pretty. Paul called us mud. That's not even worms. We're worm turds. We're mud. So in other words, I try to just make it even harder. I said, you think it's a hard pill to say that we're robots in the hand of God? It's even a harder pill if you swallow Calvinism, because we're mud in the hand of God on Calvinism. And so that's the way I used to handle it when I was a Calvinist, because guess what? If I believed the analogy meant that we were passive in the hands of God and that his decision to mold us into the people we are, then I own that analogy. I don't try to run from other analogies that draw the exact same comparison. So, brother, if you reject the interpretation of Calvinists that they typically take with regard to pottery analogy in Romans 9, then great. you're on my side of the things. Then you're with me here. We agree with each other. You don't need to be mad at me. You need to get mad at the Calvinists who are misinterpreting Romans 9 to make pottery into somebody who doesn't have responsibility to believe and repent. And that ultimately, that's God's responsibility to enact upon them through some effectual work of grace.
Let me just interject here that the potter and clay analogy is a good one to point the Calvinists to back to Jeremiah 18 and to ask them the question, what was the type of vessel that the potter had in mind when he was forming it, and then it became marred? Because if you have in your mind that God has tried to form you from birth to be a reprobate, well, then of course the marring isn't going to take place, right?
Yeah.
and so God is trying to form all of us to be His servants, to as the Westminster Confession Shorter Catechism says, glorify God and enjoy Him forever. That's what God wants for all of us, and He does not mar on purpose anybody. I mean, did the potter mar on purpose that clay that he was forming? No, he was forming it with a good intention, and God is basically saying, look, if you don't go with me, if you don't go with what I'm trying to do in your life, what my intention, which is good for you, and you become marred in my hands. Hey, I'm sovereign. I can make you into whatever I want to make you in.
Yeah. Yeah. If you become a rebellious, hardened sinner,
right. Exactly.
dictator like Pharaoh, God has every right to take that dictator, that mean criminal, and shape him into a tool that He can use for His glory. Who are you to question if God can do that? Sure, He can do that.
But He's not intending to mar you from the beginning.
Right. And that's the big difference. And we talk about this even with, what is it, 2 Timothy 2:20, when Paul uses the analogy, we talk about earthen vessels in the house, and if you cleanse yourself, you'll be used for the noble use versus the common. So Paul obviously is not using the analogy to say you have no responsibility as whether you repent or not, because he doesn't do that in Timothy. So you can't take an analogy so woodenly as to say, well, because it's a clay pot, therefore, in the same way the clay pot has no ultimate responsibility in the hand of a potter, therefore we as humanity don't really have any responsibility as to whether we repent and believe in the hand of the potter. That's just a really poor application of Paul's analogy.
Right.
All right, here we go.
That's what Calvinists believe. God pulls the strings and we jerk, and we do what God causes us to do by His meticulous determinism. And there are no free choices, according to Calvinists. I know what Calvinists have written over the years, and I know they really think.
Well, there are no libertarianly free choices, according to Calvinists. Most leading Calvinists that I've read and we've talked through, including Calvin himself, did not believe that people make libertarianly free choices. I mean, they feel that because of the fall, that people now have a nature by which they only make choices in accordance with that fallen nature, which are always going to reject the things of God unless God chose them before they were ever born. And He gives them effectual work of grace. He gives them that faith that you were talking about earlier. Unless they're given faith, they can't believe. And that's a form of determinism, whether you like it or not. It's just the way it is.
That when sinners come to Christ, they do so freely and willingly, and embrace Christ as He is offered in the gospel. I know that's what the confession says, but can Dr. Flowers really be wrong if he's got that PhD and all those followers? Think about that. So I have to confess that even though I thought I was a Calvinist because I believe these other things that Calvinists teach and have taught for centuries now, if Dr. Flowers is right, I guess I'm just not a Calvinist. And so we're going to talk next time about what's wrong with limited atonement, because we really need to get that straight. So I hope.
Which is an intramural debate among Calvinists for the most part.
And a word about meticulous. They use the word meticulous divine providence. That's a favorite phrase of Calvinists.
Very much so.
And so to say the word meticulous is not the correct term to use.
What it sounds like is, it sounds like Mr. Siver here, Randy here, it sounds like he has kind of a theological bubble of people that have been his favorite Calvinists, like Hodge, like Princeton theologians, a little bit more lower forms of modified, maybe some may even call Armaldian types.
Right.
If you're quoting Shedd, for example, and A.A. Hodge, probably going to be more of Armaldian leaning in your perspective. And many of those are not supralapsarian. They're typically sublapsarian, if not infralapsarian, depending on where they stand on that whole debate. And if you're only in that circle, and that's the kind of thing you've heard all your life, is the more modified versions, then when you hear somebody talking about a higher form of true 5-point Calvinism that you hear us combat quite regularly, you could come to the conclusion, well, those people don't understand my form of Calvinism over here, because they're confronting that form of Calvinism, so they just must not understand it. So I'm going to give Randy the benefit of the doubt and assume that that's what's happened here, is that he has heard a few of the broadcasts, and a few of the broadcasts I've been confronting Calvinistic type of Calvinism, the true Calvinism, qua Calvinism, the theistic determinism of Calvin himself and Piper and other leading Calvinists today. And he doesn't like that. And I understand. I don't like it either. So we stand in the group.
Some of them haven't even read Calvin's tome on eternal predestination because it's not as readily available. You know, they have the commentaries and they have the institutes. And there's some good quotes in the institutes that really show, his meticulous divine providence view. But they pick out from Calvin, they like reading what people have picked out from Calvin, quotes that make him sound much more Arminian.
Yeah. Well, there are a few sections where he'll say things that, and everybody has this. I mean, I'm sure people could dig through my quotes and find things that I say that sound more Calvinistic than others, and use those to, paint me in a different light if they wanted to. And Calvin has some quotes out there that sound, less Calvinistic than others. And so people can definitely do that. Well, that's why there's a big debate even among Calvinists as to whether Calvin believed in limited atonement or not. So that's a long-standing debate.
I hope you'll reconsider if you've thought you're a Calvinist all this time. Just listen to Dr. Flowers and he'll get you straight, because he knows better than what Calvinists know.
Well, I need to clip that out right there, just that little section.
Yeah.
Like what James
White, kids, play that to your wife,
do like James White does, and put that as a part of my intro, that put music behind it, and have
right. Listen to
my opponents saying things like, you should listen to Leighton Flowers.
He'll get you straight.
Get you straight. He's got this great insight
about what Calvinists believe. He's got that PhD, and so he must be
that must
right.
be the 5th time he's given it to you.
And, so
I think I should have it now.
Pay attention to Dr. Flowers, because he's got all those followers, and thousands and thousands of people can't be wrong. So
sure they can.
I just want
thousands and thousands of Calvinists.
Yeah, Roman Catholic.
Sure they can be wrong.
To confess that I've been wrong for the last 50 years, and
that is tough.
I'm going to become a provisionalist because. I just don't like to think about God causing wicked people to rape and molest little children.
Well, good. So he's rejecting what Piper said. So good. So now let's make a video then, Siver, together. You and I make a video confronting John Piper's form of Calvinism.
Yeah,
how about that? There we go. So you and I could agree, what John Piper said about God bringing about the molestation of children for his glory, we can stand together and say that is not representative of Christianity as a whole, and it's not a good representation of what Calvinists should be. We should adapt this away from what John Calvin said, away from what some of the confessions say, and we should become a modified form of Calvinism, whatever you would like to title that or call that. Feel free. But that would be an interesting program to have, because you and I would actually, Randy, be on the same side. We would both be disagreeing with John Piper and John Calvin himself, we'd be disagreeing with the leading Calvinist of representation of Calvinism together. And I think we could be pretty good at doing that. So that'd be a good thing to do.
Doesn't seem like God to me. And I don't like to think about God forcing people against their will. He's
well, true Calvinism, even the lowest form of Calvinism, is not forcing people against their will. We've explained it very clearly. He changes their will.
Yeah.
Changes their very nature to make their will.
He forces their will to change.
Right. Yeah. So you don't want to come to him until he forces the will to change to be a new nature. And then you do want to. So he's not dragging people kicking and screaming against their will. He's changing their will by his sovereign decree, by his sovereign act of regeneration, depending on what kind of Calvinist you are, his effectual call, whatever it is. It's something, people hate the word force, but haven't we talked about that before, Brian?
Yeah.
If you look at the word force, it actually fits the definition of what they're talking about. Even if you're causally determining something through a secondary cause or something like that, it's still something that God is acting effectually on the will of creatures.
It has to happen, right?
Yeah. So, I know
Calvinists have said drag. You got to translate that word in 644. Drag. God drags you,
right.
Unless the Father drags you, draws you. And so then where are they going to fit? Where do you fit regeneration in that? Your regeneration should take away the need for dragging. If my will's changed, then why does God have to drag me?
Right.
And if he's dragging me before regeneration, well, why does he have to do that? Why doesn't he just go ahead and regenerate me and then I'll just follow blindly,
Right. Well, and one of the definitions of force, at least that I just pulled up here, was coercion or compulsion.
Right.
If you're coercing the nature of man or the desires of men to change into something they're not, for example, like we talked about with a drug or a hypnosis, if I were to somehow manipulate your desires to be something different than they are right now, that would be a form of coercion or compulsion. So if somehow I had the power of hypnosis, or like with the Star Wars thing, it's you believe
Jedi
mind trick. That's it. Yeah. So if I had the ability to do that, all of us would say, well, that's coercion. That's force. That you're doing something to change the will. Now they're coming willingly. They're doing what they want to do, but the reason they're willing is because of the Jedi mind trick, because I've somehow coerced their will to do something different. And so that's what's being referenced there when we. Some people use the word force. We're not trying to misrepresent Calvinists. I think we're pretty clear to talk about what Calvinists actually say and quote from actual Calvinists, but it is what it is. All right, here we go.
We're going to drag them kicking and screaming, according to the Calvinists, into heaven, whether they want to be saved.
I even use that in my presentation, Tiptoeing Through Tulip. I actually even use that example. I even say, now Calvinists don't say that you're being drug kicking and screaming into heaven. I even say that. So, I even use some of the very words he's saying, explaining that's not what Calvinists believe or teach. So again, he just didn't do his homework.
Or not, and I guess if they want to be saved, they can't be saved unless God has chosen them. And so, I guess Dr. Flowers must be right. So I hope I haven't disappointed any of you. Some of you have appreciated my ministry. But listen, Dr. Flowers, he's got to be right. In spite of the fact that I've never ever met another Calvinist or who believed what he says Calvinists believe, but he got the PhD. So isn't that cool?
So is he trying? Do you think here, Brian, that he's trying to say that John Piper doesn't believe those things about the molestation of children, or do you think he may be?
He's reacting to something that you did in yesterday, I guess, in a video, and I guess a cumulative effect of your ministry and the influence that you're having. This is my guess, the influence that you're having on a number of people, and so he's reacting with this video, which to me seems probably it's out of character for him. I don't know him, but we get, like you said, you can get upset, and then you react. And this is all ad hominem, mostly ad hominem. And I really think it's, it could be convicted. You ever heard the phrase convicted mad, converted glad? You've punched enough holes, I think, that maybe he's frustrated because he doesn't want to think about 50 years being in the wrong camp.
That would be really hard. I mean, I was only 10 years and it was really, really hard for me.
Yeah, exactly. And so he's frustrated because you're having this influence, and he's not willing to do the work to look closely at what you're saying. So what's causing the frustration? As a pastoral heart for the guy, I would just recommend to you, Randy, please take the time, do more research. I'm actually going to look more at some of the videos that you've put out where you critique some of the theology of Leighton's.
Yeah,
and I'd be more than happy to interact with you. I do have a PhD.
There you go.
For what it's worth, and I actually got MDiv from a seminary up the road from Westminster.
Yeah.
Went to biblical seminary.
Closer to your area. That's right.
Yeah, closer in age to you. So yeah, email me. I'd be more than happy to do a discussion with you.
Well, and William on the side chat, I don't know if William knows this gentleman or what, but William is kind of defending him and saying that this video is very different from some of the other videos. I honestly haven't watched a lot of the other videos. I think I saw a little snippet of one on a drive one time because it was sent to me, and he was saying something a little bit cantankerous towards me, and it was a little bit like the heresy kind of thing, and it kind of came across as the mean kind of Calvinist that I don't really like to interact all that much with. So I kind of dismissed it, and I've just kind of ignored his stuff since then.
Is that date correct? It came out yesterday?
Yeah, he's replying to my video from yesterday when I corrected Jeff Durbin.
From the day before, right?
Yeah, it's real recent.
So there's something that really got him, and he put this out. He should, but I would say it's more of an example. We're not trying to attack Randy. As much as I think it's a good example, you got to be very careful if you're going to go after a brother's ministry. And this
somebody on the side chat said that he went after Kevin from the fundamentals. Kevin, oh gosh, that's embarrassing. I'm forgetting his last name. Kevin for Beyond the Fundamentals. Gosh, Kevin, I'm so sorry. I just forgot his name's just going out of my head. I know about 6 Kevins in my life, and so all of them.
I'm not going to try. I'm not going to try guessing.
Anyway, he critiqued Kevin, and he's Thompson, Kevin Thompson. I know who you are, Kevin Thompson.
Oh, Keith and Kevin. I get all those guys mixed up.
Thompson. Okay, yeah, Kevin Thompson. He says Randy critiqued Kevin Thompson, but it says Kevin didn't take the bait. So I guess he's implying it. Okay, we took the bait. So.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, there is a lot. Again, that's why I say be prepared. If you're going to go on video, that's why I don't do it. Except with you, you have to put up with what the flack is going to be. But if you're going to produce a video critiquing somebody else's ministry, prayerfully do the homework. And ask the Lord for wisdom of how to present the best evidence scripturally, logically, but use of ad hominem and sarcasm. It's just not a good way of going.
Yeah, and that's the irony of it, is that he ends up doing to me the very thing that he's sarcastically portraying me doing to Calvinists.
Exactly.
Misrepresenting. And I actually have documentation to show that I haven't done these.
You don't need to be defended because people know they can see it for themselves when they watch your stuff.
So yeah. I suspect he may be embarrassed by this afterwards, and I'm not trying to embarrass him. I'm just saying I think it's just not a very appropriate way to handle it.
You could say is if he takes his down, you'll take yours down.
That's fine with me. I think that the accusation of misrepresentation has been well represented on this program, but here's how he finishes here.
For any of you who are so gullible that you believe anything I just said for the last 15 or 20 minutes, please don't believe anything I said, because I didn't mean a word of it. I think that Dr. Flowers is a dangerous man who is leading thousands and thousands of people astray with his heresy.
Dum, dum, dum.
But it was fun to make fun of him. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this. May God richly bless you.
May God richly bless you as you make fun of another brother.
Yeah, Colossians 4:6, and I'll have to think about how I came across in this video. But let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how to answer every man. And grace means speaking in ways that they don't deserve, kindly, in ways they don't.
And when we talk about leading people astray, I mean, isn't the whole point of Calvinism's elect that the elect can't be led astray?
Right.
Ultimately, aren't the elect going to be saved regardless of what little old Leighton Flower says?
Well, in fact, what you're doing is for God's glory. I mean, what's the problem?
If true Calvinism is true.
What we just did was decreed, and it's actually going to help the elect in some way, right?
Yeah, which makes the rebuke, and this is the irony that just hit me a couple of days ago. I want to get your thoughts on this, Brian, why have you? We talk about, especially under provisionism, unique to even Arminianism, with regard to the words of God being sufficient and powerful and enabling. Isn't it ironic and interesting how Calvinists will oftentimes speak, and even Arminians may speak of how words from a deceiver have the power to deceive people to be condemned, but somehow words of God don't have the power.
Yeah, they need a little extra Holy Spirit salt to.
Isn't that interesting? Do you think the dichotomy of that, the deceiving words of deceivers, they'll keep saying, oh, we got to be careful because those deceivers will lead millions astray. Those deceivers will keep people, and they'll talk as if it's just so dangerous that these words over here of a deceiver have all this power. But these words over here of Christ, the inspired words, the gospel, they don't have any power unless somebody's been regenerated first.
Right.
Do you see that? I thought that was really telling.
A good phrase, right? Die Wahrheit ist untödlich.
Oh, speaking in tongues. If we don't have a translator, I'm going to have to turn you off.
Balthazar Hubmaier.
Okay, good.
Truth is unkillable. Truth is immortal.
There you go. That's true. I mean, truth sets you free. I mean,
he put that on all his tracks at the bottom.
Yeah.
And because truth is going to win out. I mean, and it doesn't need an extra juice from the Holy Spirit. That it is the Holy Spirit. It is His words. it is quick and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword. It's truth.
Amen. Yeah. Well, and truth is certainly more powerful than lies.
Yeah, exactly.
And yet people can believe the Quran and fly a jet plane into a building and thinking they're getting 72 virgins. That's a lie, and they can believe that. And yet, for some reason, people are decreed from birth by God to be morally incapable of receiving plainly spoken truth from the Bible.
Yeah, Jesus was wasting his breath with Nicodemus because he knew Nicodemus was unregenerate. He even told him so. He said, you must be born again. So why was he wasting his breath with telling him all these other things if he wasn't able to?
Versus what we would say is that you believe so as to be born again, and that he's telling Nicodemus this so that he can believe it so as to be born again.
Exactly.
Right. So, I pray that we've represented others well. I mean, I am conscious of the fact that, I mean, guys, I have a brother that leans Calvinistically. I have a nephew who's 5-point Calvinist. And who's very close, was part of my family growing up. And so it's not like a distant nephew. I mean, this is a young man that I love and have very close to. And I have many, my best friend who was, if we got married back when we knew each other, we'd be best men at each other's wedding kind of a guy. Well, the best man in my wedding is actually a pastor at a Reformed church. His name's Justin, pastor at a Reformed church. I still dearly love the man. Jason, one of my best friends, Calvinistic. Listen, I am really, really conscious of the fact when I'm doing my programs that I am combating doctrines of people that I love dearly, that I have a relationship with on a regular basis, that I have to answer to sometimes when they text me about stuff occasionally. I'm always running that through my mind about how are they going to react to this. Or are they gonna, I'm always being, I'm not in a little echo chamber bubble here, as some people are. I'm hearing from Calvinists daily. Some of my best friends are Calvinists. And you can ask Chris Date and Eli Ayala and several of the others. I have them on a little thing here, a Marco Polo and a messenger thing where they text me and chat with me all the time and have standing invitations to come on the program for different reasons. I'm not trying to just be in my little bubble over here and just shouting down those people over there who are heretic, mean people that need to be thrown out of the kingdom. I have Calvinists on the program regularly. I try to quote from them directly. I can't tell you how many times I've made the caveat in my show. Not all Calvinists are like this. Not all Calvinists believe this. Not all Calvinists say this. Not all Calvinists would agree with the way this is being said. But I'm still confronting it because I don't want any form of that kind of Calvinism to become a normative in our church, because it is, Piper's form of Calvinism is having a huge impact on our world today. And to not recognize that is to put your head in the sand, and to not understand that even though you may not agree with John Piper, you may have this odd, real strange, quasi-Calvinistic perspective over here that's completely different than John Piper, that's not dangerous at all. Maybe it's one of those things that's so well crafted and worded that you somehow get around all the little quandaries that I raise on my program all the time, but you and 12 other people hold to it. Oh, okay, congratulations. I can pray that becomes the kind of Calvinist that everybody else becomes. But that is not going to stop me from standing very firmly against the mainstream Calvinistic doctrines that are being promoted by someone with literally millions of followers, like John Piper has, with Together for the Gospel, the Grace to You Ministries, Desiring God Ministries, the Gospel Coalition, 9 Marks, Acts 29, and the list could go, Founders Ministry, the list could go on and on, all of which have millions and millions of dollars of budget. I am a drop in the ocean. Kevin Thompson and I are 2 little thimblefuls of drops in the ocean compared to the swath of the Calvinistic perspectives out there being just dominating the airwaves. And you can add a little bit bigger, maybe a little bit bigger thimble with, you add Roger Olson as an Arminian, classical Arminian, and another little thimble over here of Brian Ebashano. I mean, some of these people you listener never even heard of these people. And these are the leading voices standing against Calvinism right now. Brian Ebashano, Roger Olson, those are 2 classical Arminians, I guess you could call them. They differ on a few points. But one of them's the leader of the evangelical Arminians, Brian Ebashano. Roger Olson's written several books on the topic and has spoken out quite regularly against Calvinists, as those who know it will. Who else, Brian? I mean, who else has really made any kind of waves in the non-Calvinistic camp who've really just obviously stood for non-Calvinistic soteriology, whatever that may be?
Well, they're the good books that are written that have really helped in the non-Calvinist arena. You know, Vance's book, The Other Side of Calvinism,
right?
The Dark Side.
I guess Geisler, even though he has kind of a modified.
Yeah, there's a moderate Calvinist. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my book's not done yet, so.
Well, hey, we're already promoting your book here, so here we go.
I have a colleague actually, and I are working on a critique of, I guess it would be 7 times 4, 28 passages of scripture, and we're going to give the 3 Johns, John Calvin, John Gill, and John MacArthur's interpretation of those 7. I
guess Dave Hunt would be another name.
Yeah,
I remember hearing that wrote a book. He's gone on to be with the Lord too.
So there's some good books out there that have had a great impact, along with yours, of course. But as far as ministries dedicated just to, or with an emphasis,
I think of Jack Cottrell. Jack Cottrell would be another guy that's written quite a bit of commentaries from the Arminian perspective.
Yeah, we need some more commentaries. Really, is what we need.
Of course, Adam Harwood's writing his systematic, and it's about to come out in the next
I
year or two.
heard that, right.
Yeah,
It'd be
so I look forward to
Yeah,
that.